He's right. You know, the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, is a response to Bitcoin. Bitcoin changed money forever. It disintermediated central banks. It disintermediated all payment systems. And their response is to double down on their surveillance technology and to double down on all the worst features of fiat money by making them even worse. And so this is the beginning of a fight. It's a fight between the old guard, the old regime of fiat money and CBDC versus Bitcoin, which is perfect money.
Right. And the second in his thread, Max, reads this. This is just my opinion, but it's hard to imagine any other outcome. Once the dollar is fully digital, they will have full control. The only asset they will not be able to control will be Bitcoin. That's why this movement is important. Forget crypto bros and NFTs and whether mining uses solar panels or not. This is about the potential for the ruling class to take complete control over their subjects, or inversely, the potential for the people of the world to finally be free. Satoshi made real freedom possible. So real freedom is possible.
Is right. And that you have the attempt by the state and others, the corpocracy, the fusion of state and government, or fascism, which is what a CBDC is. It's fascism on the blockchain, to survey every moment of your life and put it into a huge database and to control you accordingly with social credit scores. If they don't like what you're watching, if they don't like what you're shopping, if they don't like how you're voting, your money will suddenly disappear because you have no control. So it's a total loss of freedom. It's total enslavement. And someone like Sean Leonard, who's an artist, a fine artist, great musician, is, the artists, as we've said many times, typically are sensitive to these types of changes a little bit ahead of the population. They have their ears and their senses are open to it. And he senses, as many folks do, that this is the last stand for humanity. Bitcoin is the last stand for humanity. It's not for nothing that El Salvador, the savior, is where we made Bitcoin legal tender.
Right. And, I do want to remind you that
I know, it's remarkable. Mobile construct of even the metaverse. Have you popped out of the metaverse?
I have
I mean, your
popped out of
shirt
the
pops to
metaverse.
the chair. So that you're saying that the cherries and the strawberries are floating without a figure of a human being.
No, because I saw myself in the monitor and I realized that I'm like...
It's a monochrome, the blue and the blue, right?
I blend in with the chair.
It's just your red pants and a head. There's nothing between your waist and your eyes.
Right.
Except some random strawberries and cherries in the metaverse.
But, so when Italy just had their recent election, remember the unelected officials of Europe were warning already before the vote, because all the polls showed that they would elect this first ever female prime minister in Italy. But the unelected officials did not like that woman, right? So they decided, they pre-warned the citizens, the voters of Italy, that if they voted for that woman, that they could be sanctioned, essentially. So this is the sort of mindset, sort of person like this woman in Italy pops up through there, that we're going to punish you. And these are the same people. This is the same mindset that will control those central bank digital currencies.
Right. And the same elite who have take control of all media and censor all dissenting views, they have overused various epithets over the years. Because the elites control the media, according to the elites, according to Paul Krugman, according to the New York Times, the Washington Post, everyone is a Nazi. Everyone is a fascist. Everyone is a terrorist. So then what happens is, okay, Italy elects somebody who's completely out of left field, who's not part of the mainstream. And so when these same people, the New York Times, the Washington Post, start using words like Nazi, fascist, etc., everyone's like, you've already outworn your welcome with those words. I mean, you're going to have to think. That's the thing about the New York Times and Washington Post. They're going to have to think for the first time in 50 years about what they're saying, because the population is not happy and they have the wherewithal to eliminate them. Nomi, nice to see you again.
Thanks, Max. Lovely to see you and Stacey again.
All righty. So tell us about permanent distortion. What are the signs of it?
Permanent distortion is where we are living in right now. The signs are that the central banks have effectively completely dismantled the relationship between the financial markets and the real economy. This has happened in two stages. One in the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008, where we saw the QE and ZERP and everything else that happened. And we've talked about that a lot. Where that distortion that created between the markets and the real economy became permanent. Like, we're not going back. There's no old normal. There's nothing we're returning to. Was in the wake of the COVID pandemic in 2020, when the Federal Reserve just basically went on turbo crazy boost and doubled the size of its book in effectively 10 minutes, or certainly way faster than it had done in the aftermath of the financial crisis, to nearly $9 trillion. Other central banks around the world followed suit. And the market was airlifted almost instantaneously, whereas the real lag behind all of that on a permanent basis in a permanent distortion world that we're living in.
How is a permanent distortion any different than a freak show?
Well, the reason it's permanent is because there's no idea that we're getting back to anything, or that this is the new state. There's never going to be a relationship where there's an exact correlation or any form of correlation between the economy and the stock markets. Now, obviously, we've been going here for a long time. It's not like there's ever been a period where there's been no distortion. But there's always been this sort of backdrop sense, certainly by a lot of talking heads and a lot of books, et cetera, where somehow we're going to get back to normal. Things are going to normalize. What I'm saying here is that there is no normal. We're not normalizing. We are just.
It's called the natural interest rate. And so bond markets, 10-year Treasury bond markets have, for the most part, hovered around that 4 to 5% range, and that's called the natural rate. And for a long time, to your point, they were artificially kept cheap. This caused a lot of distortions. Now the central banks are saying, we want to get back to the normal rate. So isn't that an attempt to get back to normalization?
Well, it might be an attempt to get back to normal rates. But if we step back and look at the full entire picture, yes, central banks are saying that and doing that. I think they're doing the narrative around it that this is somehow going to impact inflation and sort of reduce the cost of food and fuel is ridiculous. But net of that, yes, they are saying that they need to fight these inflationary numbers. But with respect to the money they've created, with respect to their books, even with respect to the policy that the Federal Reserve supposedly is on right now to let bonds roll off its book to attempt to get into that more sort of normalized state, the pace of that really is meaningless compared to the size of the book and the size of the general help that has been injected, whatever it's called, trying to get back to some normal or sort of past average. As that might or might not happen, it doesn't touch the fact that all this money is been created and will continue to be created. The UK is one really excellent example of that. The minute there is an extreme crisis in the pension sector, not that hasn't been a crisis in the making for years, as rates have become so low on UK government bonds, on UK gilts, that there's not enough money coming into pension funds to make the obligations, to pay the liabilities of those pension funds to actual pensioners. That's been happening since QE. So quickly, those leveraged margin amounts need to be repaid. Central Bank, Bank of England, jumping back in and creating money. So what I mean by permanent is, again, this is the go-to situation. It's not a little bit of liquidity when we need it now and then. It's not a little bit of rejiggering of rates up and down to fight or not fight things that central banks can or cannot control. That's part of this. But it is about the fact that we have a permanent situation where there is money that can be created and remains available that lifts